Hi, this is Tony with All Things Music. This is our third, part 3 of my current mix template video. So let's take a look here. So we talked about vocals, guitar, strings, keys, and bass last time. Now we're going to talk about the drums. The drums is going to be a little bit more complex. Definitely a little bit more complicated. So the drums here, we've got a lot going on. We've seen all of these plugins in the previous videos. So I'm just going to talk about what we may not have seen before necessarily. So for the snare, I'm going to make this active here. Oh, that should be turned off, but oh well. Well, I'll just leave it on because that's the way I found it. So here I might be using the Slate Digital FG Stress. It emulates a Empirical Labs distressor. Absolutely love the distressor. I've worked with the hardware units. I love it on snare. So that's why I have it there as part of my mix template. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the routing as well. You're going to see here a lot of parallel processing. You're going to see here some duplicates as well. So these plugins are essentially the same in terms of the ones that we've talked about. So because of that, we're just going to talk about a little bit in terms of what I'm doing with the routing. I haven't talked about these groups here yet. So the kick has its own group. In fact, if I can give me a hot second here. Here we go. So here we have a number of VCAs and groups, as you can see here on this left-hand side. The drums has a number of groups. So if I press the letter K here, right, if I go into Pro Tools and press letter K, you're going to see this part just got highlighted. So when I move these kicks up and down, there you go. So the kicks have their own parallel compression and parallel processing aux buses that they feed for a number of reasons. Snare is the same thing. The toms right here, the same thing. And then even the overheads and the room mics also have their own parallel compression and parallel processing buses. So let's take a look at a little bit of the routing, at least with the snare, because this is where it gets tricky, right? Snare has its own group. I press letter S. Now all the snares are going to move up and down, right? Now, if I go to the toms, they also have their own group as well, not VCA. The drums are all on one big VCA, or they're all assigned to one VCA fader, right? Now, these overheads in the room, I thought I created something for them. Maybe I didn't. They probably should though. But if I'm going to go back here, those are orchestra strings. I'll have to come up with something for them. But here's kind of this cheat sheet. I kind of have it all memorized for the most part. Once I activate the VCAs though, I don't ever touch these again. I should probably have something for the room and the overtoms. Or I'm sorry, for the rooms and the overhead mics. So I might change that. Orchestra strings is my strings as well. So maybe it'll be the letter Y. I don't know. Anyhow, I'm going to move that to the side. So let's take a look at specifically what's going on with the snare drum. I have a snare mono. Let's say I just get a recording, it's just one mic on the snare, that's fine. Maybe snare stereo. I've gotten recordings with a snare side. Yeah, sometimes it's a snare side, snare top, snare bottom. So it depends what's going on. And I could duplicate these if I felt like it, but just to start I have this. Let's just say I have one snare track, right? just a one mic on the snare drum. This is going to get duplicated. This is where it gets interesting. Let's go, I'm going to activate this for a moment. Let's say in the chorus of a song, you want it to sound like, you want the band to sound like they're in a slightly bigger room, or they're hitting harder, so you want to hear a little bit more reverb. I'm not going to gate on the original track. So first off, let's actually, before I go there, this output, so I'm going to duplicate this track here, as you can see, and this is going to go to a bus called Nowhere. Nowhere has no output, and because I muted it, even though it doesn't need to be muted, it's not going anywhere. There's no processing on it. So what's going on here? I could increase the amount of reverb. Let's say I have a little bit of reverb, right? I could increase the reverb on this. Here's the problem. I'm not going to be gating this snare track. And if I do, it's going to be very mild, but it's not even going to be worth much of a darn. It's still going to pick up tom fills, the kick drum, the cymbals, etc. Right? So I'm going to be pushing more reverb of everything that mic is picking up. And that's going to be feeding the reverb. So I'm going to be getting a little bit of kick, tom fills, cymbals, etc. in the reverb, which I don't want. So I might have this at a more modest amount. I just have all my aux in set at -6 to start. So what I might do is I might duplicate that snare track and I might gate the heck out of it so it only picks up the snare during the chorus, right? And in fact, I will probably edit out. Let's say I want the snare to sound a little bit, as if it's in a bigger room during the chorus and the bridge. I will edit out the snare drum from the verse on the duplicate track and then only initiate it here. But even then, in this instance, for example, in this particular instance, I will gate this so I don't really hear the kick drum or the tom fills. And gates aren't perfect. It's going to sound choppy at some point, or it can be. So I'm going to gate as much as I can, and then this is going to add more signal. Because if I were to gate the snare drum here, the dry signal, it's going to not sound fantastic. Especially if I aggressively gate it. Here I can get a little bit more aggressive with gating. So I'm going to gate this, and then I'm going to drive additional reverb to different reverb tracks. Reverb accents, or reverb auxes, I should say. So that's why. Same thing with this duplicate. So I can definitely do that, and it's going to be a better result. So that's what's going on with the drums. So let's talk a little bit about here. Is there anything else I want to mention here? No. The only thing I might mention is for parallel compression, just for the overheads, or for the whole kit. I might use the distressor, which we've talked about already. The API 2500, although to be fair, it's probably been a year since I've used the API 2500. It's not a bad plugin. It's not a bad compressor, the actual hardware compressor. It's a great hardware compressor. A lot of people like it as their master bus compressor. I just haven't really used it, not because I don't want to, I just haven't really had much of an opportunity to, so. Or just, I don't know, I ended up using other things, but. Now let's take a look at the master bus. We're going to go back into talking about the groups here, but we're going to talk about the master bus next. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting on the drums, but I'll come back to it. Everything feeds this bus master, and that feeds a mix master. It's a long story, which I won't get into, and then this is really just for monitoring. So here I've got my Duros. If things go over, then I can use this VCA that's assigned to all the instrument tracks. See how all the instrument tracks went down in volume. I'm going to reset this. So if it's hitting this too loud, I can just turn everything down, and I'm good to go. That's all it's there for. Going into this, you can essentially think this as a master bus, but not quite. So here I might use the Waves NLS bus. I'll show you what that looks like. It's very similar to the NLS channel. So again, I can emulate the sound of the master bus from, say, a Neve, an API, or a Neve console. So I can do that. I might use the VMR virtual mix bus emulator, but to be fair, I'm using these a lot less. The API 2500, again, it's a good compressor. I'm going to show that to you just so you can see it. It's a good compressor. A lot of people use it on their master bus. People who do hybrid mixing, they're mixing in Pro Tools, but then they're going to print through this onto a print bus. So they might use the actual hardware unit, send the signal through the hardware unit, and then it goes back into Pro Tools. So they might actually use the hardware version of this. The FG Gray I am using less and less. I probably not have used this in maybe a year or two. It emulates the SSL 4000G series master bus compressor. What I do tend to use the most is, I will show you here, the Waves SSL solid state G series 4000G series master bus compressor. I do tend to use this quite a bit. It's kind of a safety in a way before it goes to the limiter. And this will probably compress about 1 to 2 dB. So that will be going through there. CLA Mixdown, I haven't used it in about a year or two. I'll show it to you just because. The trick to get this to work is you want to have the levels hot enough where it's naturally compressing about 2 to 3 dB. If it's below 2, that needle swinging below 2, it's not enough. It's got to be between 2 and 3. Above 3, you're probably clipping signal going into it. So it's got a sweet spot. It's meant to really operate at optimum at the default setting. So I've used it. I think the last mix I used it on came out was last summer, I think. So these I don't really use much except for the SSL. And then here we have the Clairphonic parallel equalizer. I love this plugin. It's used on a lot of mixes that I work with. A little bit goes a long way. So you will see mixes where I literally have this like that, and maybe that like that, and that's it. It goes a long way. Some people use the hardware units, and this is based off the hardware unit. It's just absolutely, it's an excellent plugin. Has 2 EQ engines, if you will, a focus engine as they call it, and a clarity engine, and then the different switches will toggle different frequency bands. Lift, open, tight, diffuse, etc. Do you want presence, more presence, or sheen, more shimmer, or silk? So, in fact, here's one from a track I just recently worked on. Look how subtle that is. So, another one that I just started fooling around with, which I really like, is the Knife Audio Soma. This can take up a lot of CPU. It's based on the actual hardware unit. It's a really amazing mastering equalizer. So I cannot tell you how awesome this particular plugin is. If I need to use it, I am wary that it does take up quite a bit of CPU, but it is excellent. Again, another product by Brainworks, distributed by Plugin Alliance. Finally, Isotope Ozone 9. I'm going to make some of these inactive. So Isotope Ozone 9. I basically use the imager, I adjust it to taste. A little bit can go quite a long way. Depends on the application. I'm going to go back to user default. This is where I start off. The ceiling is at -5 dB full scale, and the threshold, I'll adjust the threshold to taste. The threshold usually doesn't go above -8. It might go more like -9, -8.5, but that's where I start off with for this plugin. I used to use the Waves L2. I like Ozone. I used to not take it seriously, only because I used to teach out of school, and a lot of my students loved using it just as a quick way to kind of get signals more or less balanced with one another. And in general, I'm not a fan of like all like an all-in-one type of plugin, but they did a great job. I think it's more transparent than the L2, so that's why I like it compared to the Waves L2. I've moved over from the L2 to Ozone, and so I like it. I think it's a great plugin. So I've used it. I've basically been using it as my dedicated mastering bus limiter now for the past, I don't know, year and change. So cannot recommend it enough. So that is always going to be on my mix bus. For metering, I might have the Ulean loudness meter. This is actually a free plugin. I definitely recommend checking it out. You can get integrated LUFS. You can get average dynamics, so you have your peak to loudness ratio. So I like it. I was using the WLM meter for some time, but the Ulean is starting to take over it. So and make that inactive and make that inactive as well. Yes, this I'm going to bypass and make it inactive, but and so all this feeds this master bus, but so everything gets routed to this bus master, which then goes to this mix master. It's a long story why that is, which I don't want to get into just yet. And then this feeds this. So everything eventually goes through these three. So it goes to the bus master, which then goes to the mix master, which then goes to this. So, all right, and I'm going to move on to part 4 of this video.